Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. We've got another interview today, and this one's going to be awesome. I've been looking forward to talking to Dylan Gill. Dylan, say hi.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So Dylan and I, well, we've been friends on Facebook for a long time, so we met the first time in person out in LA. It must have been a few months ago now, right? And yep. We were doing, that's right. It was when we had flown there. A bunch of guys had flown there to do that follow-up episode, that season 2 follow-up episode for the handful of guys in season 1. And Dylan came out to LA to hang out for the day, and we had a fucking blast. And it was awesome. And so Dylan's a second-generation Scientologist. And Dylan, have you ever you've never done any interviews, right? Like you've posted on, I think Tony Ortega's used you as a source for some things he's written. I think you've, you're on Facebook, you're in the Supporters of Lrh Archives Facebook group, but have you ever done an interview?
Negative. I did an article with Tony a few years back when he was with the Village Voice, but it primarily focused on the secretive vaults and the Church of Spiritual Technology. So,
right. All right, cool. Well, we have so much to talk about. Like, how much time do you have? Do you have a couple hours? I mean,
yeah, I'm free. My wife's home and the kids are occupied.
Sweet, sweet. All right, so I don't even know where to begin. I do. Let's just tell everyone right off the bat. You spent a chunk of your Sea Org career at what in Scientology we call CST, the Church of Spiritual Technology. And out of all the organizations in Scientology, it's probably the least well known, especially among Scientologists. Most Scientologists don't even know it exists. On Scientology's International Organizing Board, it is one of the 3 most senior organizations. And like technically, if to the viewers, if I get any of this technically wrong, jump into the comments. But I'm reasonably confident that RTC, ASI, and CST are essentially 3 organizations that technically are all equally senior to each other. In reality, I know it doesn't quite work out like that. RTC and David Miscavige is the boss of everyone. But CST is no joke. Like CST is one of the things, like no matter where you are in the Sea Org, you call people in CST sir. Kind of like RTC. No matter where you are in the Sea Org, you call them sir. So even though we have so much to talk about, and we'll start from the beginning, tell us a little bit about CST. Like, what is it? What did you do there? What function does the place serve? And what do you find most interesting about that experience?
Well, so I guess to start, I was at Flag, and I was married to a girl named Bronwyn Bolger, and there was a recruitment or man-up mission going around all of the Sea Org orgs, and they were recruiting for Lrh Archives. And Lrh Archives is what the Sea Org refers to CST as. So nobody really in the Sea Org knows, and you're never supposed to say CST to any other Sea Org member other than other CST staff. So when I was getting recruited, I was getting recruited for Lrh Archives. It's a special archiving organization that preserves all of the Lrh material for all of time. It's supposed to be for thousands of years, and supposed to be the preservation arm of the Sea Org, basically, I guess. So, like I said, I was at Flag, and we got sent to LA to get clearances. And of course, everything in Scientology, when you get selected for something, requires clearances. They look back through your history. You get a lot of sec checking, non-disclosure agreements, and all the while not really knowing what you're doing or what you're in for. So I spent a year from Clearwater got sent to PAC, and I spent about 6 to 8 months going through the clearance process. I had been a messenger in the CMO prior to that at Flag. So when I went to PAC, I was a messenger at CMO IXU doing missions. So it's kind of cloak and dagger. When you get, I was getting sec checked, and there was no like clear path. It was just like get sec checked, compile kind of a CSW, which is completed staff work, and then get more sec checks, and then get more of this, more questions, write essays or whatever. And then all of a sudden, one day, your CSW was approved, and actually a guy named Laurel showed up in the morning and drove me up to CST.
So just to define a couple things, so you said this started when you were at Flag. So you're at Flag, you're already a Sea Org member.
Right.
What year did you join the SO at Flag?
Late 84, early 85.
And how old were you?
I was 14 and a half, almost 15 years old.
Okay. And so then you're at Flag. How many years would you say you were a Sea Org member at Flag before this Lrh Archive recruitment program came along?
About 3 years. I was in the CMO for about 3 years.
Okay, so when you were at Flag, you were in CMO the whole time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So just for the viewers, CMO is the Commodore's messengers organization. The Commodore is L. Ron Hubbard. They're messengers. They basically are emissaries of him. And the way CMO works in the Scientology org board and world is you have certain organizations that deliver services, other organizations that manage those organizations, and then you have the CMO, which is responsible for establishing management and making sure management is managing.
Actually,
So,
they're the observation and execution arm
of WDC.
Inc. management, right? Yeah.
Right. But just to explain it in sort of layman's terms, like you have these redundant levels, and it's kind of like the Watchdog Committee, which is the highest echelon of CMO. You know, their job is to put management there and make sure management is managing. Technically, they're not supposed to be managing themselves. Meaning they themselves are not supposed to be the managers of Scientology. They're supposed to be established, making sure management manages. So you see the redundancy here.
Right.
And I just wanted to also use this as an example to point out, you're at Flag, you're 14, 15, 16 years old, and you are a member of the Commodore's Messengers, and they are typically young teenagers, boys and girls. And so, okay, so, and no matter where you are in the CMO, that is considered as, it's a senior organization. It's, well, you know, technically as CMO is under, would you agree that technically CMO is junior to the trifecta I just mentioned of CST, RTC, and ASI? But then under that, you have CMO, basically over all of Scientology. Do you agree with that explanation, or would you say it differently?
Yeah, well, absolutely for layman's terms, but technically they're actually to the side. And they don't have so there's the echelons of the management. You have your service orgs, your management orgs, and all that. And CMO's kind of all encompassing on the side to observe and execute the orders of WDC and CMO Inc., which happen to be one and the same. Because that's all WDC members are all CMO Inc. members. And
exactly. And right. I mean, this is where I love talking about this stuff. Because on the one hand, you have the highest echelon of the CMO, which is called the Watchdog Committee. Right. And this is CMO International. And if you look on the organizing chart for International Scientology, it is a big bar that runs
Watchdog Committee
above the entire Scientology management structure. And yet, when you get down to the lower middle management and continental management, the CMO exists on the side because, like you said, observation, execution, and enforcement arm of the Watchdog Committee, which is, but it's all one and the same. And as you know from experience, the CMO very easily sort of gets out of its lane, if you will, of not just observation. Well, I was going to say they start managing, but if you say they are supposed to observe, execute, and enforce, that's right. they're supposed to be executing and enforcing the orders and the programs from CMO International.
Well,
so they end up managing, but everyone's managing. It's all a clusterfuck of redundancy.
I think the reason why that is because normal Scientology org, the production and qual divisions are auditing, and the CSs and qual, where in CMO it's action and ops, which is observation. So they do evals and all that kind of stuff. And Action Bureau is like their tech division, where they go out and deal with any little programs or eval executions and that kind of thing. So there's not, in the CMO unit, there is no qual or tech. It's action and ops.
That's a great point.
So,
I myself am not familiar with the CMO org board, as I was never in CMO.
Right.
There's things like that never even occurred to me. Another example of things I've never had an opportunity to ask someone to explain to me is, what the fuck are CMO TRs? Like, I mean, I know conceptually what they are, but I don't know very specifically what you're practicing. Like, I've gotten the impression you practice being an asshole. But let's not get into that just yet. So, okay, and the other thing I wanted to explain to the viewers was this concept of a CSW. Dylan explained it stands for Completed Staff Work, which again is a ridiculous name for something. Is essentially anytime you need to get approval for anything, you put a package of information together in a particular way to get it approved and to make it easy for an executive to say approved or disapproved. So CSW in Scientology is used all the time. Like, if you need a day off, you put in a CSW. The situation is, I would like a day off. The data is that my statistics are up for the week and I have someone to cover my post, and it is my week for liberty. Solution, please approve my day off. So that's like a CSW for a dumb little thing. And then you could have a CSW for a big thing, like situation. We want to send Dylan Gill to international management. Data. And the data could be like, you know, the hundreds of pages of summaries of your sec checks.
Right.
And